States of America. And that the founding fathers who wrote that Constitution believed that they were inspired by divine providence to produce the kind of document they did. And they believed in, and we believe in, liberty and justice for all. So I wanted to start out with that.
We all know that our government is way off track. The debt is astronomical and it's going to quicken not only our own freedom and our own economy, but our children and our grandchildren are going to be effectively slaves paying for all the things that we're spending money on today. We also know that Washington, D.C. will never fix itself. The Founding Fathers recognized that this was a potential as well. In Article 5 of the Constitution, they gave us a solution. The states have the power under Article 5 to call a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. Because sometimes what you need is not a change of personnel, you need a change of structure. The founders understood the importance of structure and they gave the power to the states to create a new set of rules. When the federal government overstepped its boundaries, we could recalibrate the rules to take power away from Washington, D.C. and give it back to the people and to the states. There's a simple plan for doing this. There are 4,000 legislative districts that are really crucial to us, and we want to have grassroots organizations in 4,000 legislative districts across the country. These are state house legislative districts because the state legislature is what matters. We need you to join with us. We need 100 citizens in each of these districts to be citizen volunteers and local leaders to make sure that Washington, D.C.'s power is taken back and returned to the people. The Founding Fathers understood that structure was an important part of preserving liberty. Please join with us at conventionofstates.com and help us preserve liberty, not only for ourselves, but for our children, our grandchildren, and the generations to come.
There are really four major abuse areas that are being perpetrated by the federal government. First, of course, is spending in the debt crisis. Debt right now is at $17.9 trillion, and that's rounded off a little, so we're moving into all the numbers. The other thing is that doesn't include all the entitlements that are not currently on the books. And some people say that's another $65 trillion beyond what we already have. We have a regulatory crisis. There are Congress has delegated lawmaking to agencies. They basically create regulations. Those regulations have the force of law. There's a congressional attack on state sovereignty. What that means is the Congress taxes the people, takes the money to Washington, then they turn around and grant the money back to the states, but they attach mandates to those grants. And in the process, if the state doesn't do that, well, then the state doesn't get the money. If they implement the mandates, then the state becomes nothing but an agent for the federal government. And finally, there's the takeover of the decision-making process. And by that I mean the federal government elements, the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the President, are really basically in collusion with each other. Because when they make a decision, bad policy decision, the other two support them. It's supposed to be checks and balances, and that isn't what's happening in our nation today. What does this mean? Washington, D.C. will never relinquish power if they don't have to, if they aren't forced to. The states and the citizens, us, we're going to have to be proactive about doing something about that. And this is not a partisan issue. This should be important to everybody. One of the things that Mr. Ferris talked about in terms of structure has to do with where the decisions are made, who makes the decisions. It's not so much about what the decision is, but who makes the decision. And closer to home is always better.
United States Constitution was written to form a more perfect union that would enable checks and balances to prevent a bloody revolution from being a necessary measure to abolish tyranny. Excellent though it was, Colonel George Mason feared the national government might one day end in a tyrannical aristocracy. The rights of the people needed to be secured against potential corruption at the national level. One of the solutions the framers decided upon can be found in Article 5, which gives state legislators the authority to call a convention that bypasses federal legislators to amend the Constitution. That gives we, the people, the opportunity to make some long overdue structural adjustments. Maybe term limits would be a good place to start. Here's how the process works. Citizens request their state legislators to pass a bill called an application with operative language identical in each state. These legislators of the state then pass the application. Generally, only a simple majority is needed. Congress shall, by law, call a convention of the states as soon as it receives applications from 2/3 of the state legislatures. That's 34 states. Delegates chosen by the state legislatures attend the convention. Each state only gets one vote at the convention, but they can send as many delegates to represent the state as they so choose. Amendments are proposed, debated, and voted upon at the convention. Final ratification takes place in the states. Each amendment must be ratified by 3/4 of the states in order to become part of the U.S. Constitution. But what about a runaway convention?
Come.
Let's get a reality check. Like constitutional law scholar Robert G. Nadelson says, there are far more political and legal constraints on a runaway convention than on a runaway Congress. The convention delegates, also called commissioners, are bound to the will of their state legislatures. If they don't vote as their states demand, they get recalled and might even get sent to prison. Furthermore, a full 3/4 of the state legislatures, we're talking 38 state legislatures, must ratify each and every amendment in order for it to become part of the U.S. Constitution. Even Alexander Hamilton and Abraham Lincoln, who favored national government, emphasized that Article 5 gives states authority over the national government. Hamilton writes that national rulers have no option upon the subject. The words of Article 5 are peremptory. Congress shall call a convention. And Lincoln says the convention mode seems preferable in that it allows amendments to originate with the people themselves. Article 5 Convention of the States is a safe route to stopping federal overreach. Civilizations rise and fall. Let's be a civilization that saw the cycle of collapse coming and broke it.
Article 5 is the method by which the people acting through the state legislatures can put the federal government back into the limited government box that the founders intended for it, and that they designed it for. And this truly is a bipartisan activity because 60% of people, according to recent surveys, say government is too big. 54% say government is burdensome and impeding their lives. And 53% say the federal government is a direct threat to their liberty. There have been other calls for conventions of state, but our proposal is different. The other calls have been single subject calls for convention of states. By that I mean either a balanced budget amendment or a single topic amendment, things of that sort. But ours is different because we are talking about an issue that needs to be addressed, and that is the issue of limited government. We need to have that convention so we can debate these issues and bring it into alignment with whatever the people in the convention think is the right answer. This is what our application says. The operative words are basically impose physical restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office of its officials and of Congress. And the term limits applies to Supreme Court. One of the things that the founders never thought about was that people were going to live to be 80 and still be sitting on the Supreme Court. Nobody lived that long except for Ben Franklin. So what could the amendments be? Well, these are just some thoughts that people have suggested, and they fall within the limits that we mentioned before. The balanced budget, the original intent of the welfare clause, that's one of the things that the Supreme Court has allowed people to drive a truck through. General welfare was supposed to be those things that you could spend money on that the states didn't. States couldn't, and that's the general welfare. The intent, or original intent for the Commerce Clause, that was intended to be dealing with commerce between states. It wasn't intended to deal with anything with inside a state. Inside a state was a state's problem. We don't want to see international law used to decide local court issues. Why would the law of France have anything to do with our domestic issues, or treaties for that matter, like the current treaty is attacking the Second Amendment? We need to limit executive orders and federal regulations that are enacted as laws. Term limits on Congress and the Supreme Court, upper limits on spending and taxation, and sunset all of the major federal taxes and get a supermajority vote to replace them with something newer and federal. One of the things also that's been suggested is sunset all of the agencies. I went to usgov.gov and they list some 521 different agencies that are part of the federal government. How in the world does anybody manage that? And why do we need them? So the question now is, who do you trust? In the end of the day, you're going to have to pick one. If you do nothing, by definition, you have picked Congress. And recent history says that's probably the wrong answer. So where are we today in this project? Well, 3 states have passed our application: Alaska, Florida, and Georgia. These other 9, and there may be more that I'm unaware of, have active legislation in front of their sponsors, in front of their legislation, legislators, I'll get it right eventually. And they have, right now we have directors in 43 states. We have, in Florida, we have 39 district captains, and there's 120 different Florida House legislature districts. So we have 39 of those. In Florida, we have about 7,000 members, including some of South Georgia and Alabama, want them in. And in the United States, we have about 100,000 members of this movement. So we're making progress. The important part is that the legislative season starts after the first year. There will be a lot of state governments meeting, and they need to be encouraged to take this application and pass it. How can you help? Sign up. There's business cards on the table, and in that business card there are websites. There's one that has my recruiter number on it. If you follow that link, type it into your browser, it'll take you to a place where it says sign a petition. And when you do that, if you fill out all the information, we'll be able to get in touch with you, keep you up to date on what's going on, and we would really appreciate that. You need to contact your legislative representatives, your senator as well as your House member. Let them know that you really do believe that this is the right answer to solving our problem. And you need to educate yourselves, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your associates, anybody that you come into contact with, and please help recruit them, get them to follow that link and sign up as well. On our website, there is such a wealth of information about the Constitution, the Convention of States and the Constitution. I'm going to give you just a world of information and stuff that I hadn't ever thought about. Why should you help? Well, here's some thoughts. Plato says you're going to be governed by your inferiors if you don't participate in politics. And Edmund Burke says evil will prevail if good men do nothing. And of course, Jefferson said you only have to, you're only going to get governed by those that participate. So if you don't, you deserve what happens to you. And of course, Mr. Reagan told us what's going to happen. We're either going to do something to fix these things, or we're going to start our way on 1,000 years of darkness. And we're going to put our children and grandchildren into that box. Thank you very much.